Hello, ASU GSV conference goers. It's great to be with you today. I'm Michelle Marks, Chancellor of the University of Colorado, Denver, and I have the pleasure of moderating a panel of superstar higher ed chiefs from a wide range of institutions who are going to share with us their thinking about today's challenges and tomorrow's opportunities. You know, earlier today, I joined a webinar with former U.S. Secretary of Defense and former President of Texas A&M, Robert Gates. And he said that the job that he would least like to have right now is president of a university. But here we are with these jobs, and it's a real moment for leadership in higher education. Let me start off by asking the panelists to give brief introductions of themselves and of their institutions. And let me start with Peter.
Thanks, Michelle, and hello, everybody. I'm Peter Cohen. I'm the president of University of Phoenix. Have been for about the past 3.5 years. Have about 24 years in education. A lot of that time, about 20 years in K-12, and then overlapping with about 7 years in higher education. University of Phoenix was started about 44 years ago by Dr. John Sperling, specifically to serve working adults. We're pretty much defined by the commitment of our staff and faculty. We've got about 9,000 people supporting about 87,000 students. Those 87,000 students are largely working adults, largely moms with dependents, largely already in their career and looking to get ahead in their career. We have practitioner faculty. It's a requirement of our faculty that they work in their field. And on average, they have about 25 years of experience in their field and about 12 years experience in serving our students as faculty. And we're mostly focused on business, health, education, and IT.
Great. Ben?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Nelson at Minerva. Minerva is the youngest and smallest of the institutions represented here, but a friend of mine a couple of months ago said to me that, you know, you're now the world's oldest continuously operating elite university because we continue to work in the same way with our students today as we have over the past 6 years. So Minerva is an institution that is devoted to critical wisdom as the core of the educational enterprise. So how to shift higher education from a focus on the dissemination of knowledge to the application of knowledge, or what we colloquially term wisdom. We are also a very different institution than most others in the makeup of our students. So despite the fact that we're the most selective university in the United States, last year we had more than 25,000 applicants and an acceptance rate of below 1%. The students themselves come from all over the world, where vast majority of our students are not American. The vast majority of our students come from non-wealthy families. 80% of our students can't afford the $30,000 a year that we charge for tuition fees, room and board. And our outcomes from Minerva are among, if not the top in the country. Our students go on to be employed not only at jobs that are far more advanced than typical, even highly selective college graduates, but they also have graduate school placements that I think are among the very top of any graduating class, and that is central to our mission of revised education.
Thank you. Eloy?
All right, well, thanks for the opportunity to be with everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Eloy Oakley. I'm the Chancellor of the California Community Colleges, and I'm sort of the opposite end of the spectrum as Ben's institution. We are 116 colleges, over 2 million students. We have the pleasure of accepting the top 100% of students. So that's a great point of pride for us. We are the largest system of public higher education in the country. 1 out of every 4 community college students in the nation is in our system. We have 115 brick and mortar colleges throughout California from border to border, as well as 1 relatively new competency-based, fully online institution, Calbright College. So we serve students all throughout the state, transfer our students to many institutions, including Morehouse, as well as University of Phoenix, and probably need some more going to Davidson College, but we can talk about that later. But it's a pleasure to be here. Look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. And Carol.
There we go. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Carol Quillen, and I serve as president of Davidson College, which is an undergraduate serving institution, largely residential, located outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Probably three important things to know about Davidson are, first, it has a sort of distinctive mission for a traditional residential institution, which is specifically to assist students in developing humane instincts and disciplined and creative minds for lives of leadership and service. Davidson is committed, has need-blind admissions, and committed to meeting the demonstrated financial need of all admitted students without loans in the packages. The average package for first-year students is $48,000. And for a small undergraduate serving institution of about 2,000, we play Division I sports. So those are three interesting and distinctive things about Davidson. And I've been there. My academic background is in history. I have a PhD in history. I've been serving as president for about 10 years.
Thanks, Carol. And David.
Thanks, Michelle. Yes, I'm the president of Morehouse College, and a few things that distinguish Morehouse. First of all, and on this panel, Morehouse is a historically Black college and university. It's also the largest college in the country that's dedicated solely to the education of men. And because of our historically Black college lineage, we are, what I like to say is that we are the only institution in the country, higher education, dedicated to the production of Black male excellence at scale. You can go anywhere and find a few. This is the only place where this is the only place, single place in the planet where you can find 2,200, where you can go to a college graduation, liberal arts, selective college, and find over 400 walking the commencement stage at any point in time. We're known for producing leaders. Our most well-known graduate was Dr. Martin Luther King, and he's the tip of the iceberg. And we like to say that some people only know Morehouse because of King. We like to say that there would be no King without Morehouse. And we think we will see a new generation of leaders who will address the challenges that are facing our country as we move forward in the 21st century.
Wow, it's so fantastic to have all of you with us today. So let me start out with the first question, which is, can each of you speak briefly to how this moment, how today shows up on your campus or in your institution today, and what's your biggest challenge right now? And can you also comment on something that has changed? What has changed most significantly on your campus or at your institution from this time last year to right now, fall 2020? And let's see, why don't we go in reverse order? How about you first, David?
A few things. Well, probably the thing that has changed the most is that overnight we went from having fewer than 10 online courses to taking our entire curriculum online with a group of students who, quite frankly, had never done online learning in any significant way. And that's really taken us very quickly into an area that when we talk about what the future holds for Morehouse, I'll talk about, which is the online education. What this moment has also done for Morehouse, because from our perspective, we are very aware that this is a moment of two pandemics, the COVID-19 pandemic and the pandemic of institutionalized and systemic racism that still captures many of our institutions. Being a college that's 95% men who identify as Black, our students have been, many of our students have been at the forefront of some of the protest and mobilization around the needs of their community, for example, food security, housing, and that's very much at the heart of the DNA of Morehouse around nonviolent social advocacy. So I think what we've seen in this odd moment is actually a sort of reinvigoration of our community and our students understanding about how they're uniquely equipped to answer this moment.
Thanks. Carol.
So I think, I would second what President Thomas said. That is to say, a largely residential face-to-face institution takes much of its work, curricular and co-curricular, virtual, and that's a big change. And so a big challenge for us and a huge opportunity is how you build connection, both internally within a class or on campus, but also externally with the partners with whom we're accustomed to work. A lot of the work at Davidson College takes place in the community. And so especially now, given the challenges around systemic racism that President Thomas mentioned, it's harder and it's a different situation to work with those community partners when you can't be proximate, when you can't actually be out in the community without putting that community at risk. And so I think we figured out new ways of building and sustaining connection, both on our campus and with our broader community and business partners. And we've also learned that we value the opportunity to be together. I think our faculty, our professors have gotten really good at using new tools, digital tools, as they build out these classes, and I think that will serve us well moving forward. We have a commitment at Davidson to address systemic racism on our own campus. We're a college that was founded in 1837 and exclusively white for a long time, and coming to terms with the legacies of that and dismantling the structures that still reflect those racist assumptions is a big task, and we're striving to live up to our own aspirations by taking steps in that direction now.
Thank you. Eloy.
So what has changed? Much of what you've heard already certainly has changed for the California Community Colleges. Over a 2-week period, we converted to remote or online learning for all of our 116 colleges and 2.1 million students. The challenge with that, of course, is we were already experiencing enormous amounts of food insecurity before the pandemic. We were already experiencing huge amounts of housing insecurity and economic disenfranchisement in our community. So this pandemic, this moment of social and racial reckoning have really put a spotlight on the role that we play in the communities that we serve. And I think that has been the biggest change. I mean, certainly we can talk about the challenges with access to broadband and technology. It's interesting that, we're participating in ASU GSV, highlighting the new digital economy and digital education, but we have such a hard time in the state of California, the cradle of innovation, serving the majority of our students because of this lack of access to broadband. So it's really created a spotlight for us. So the biggest change in where we find ourselves is holding a mirror up in front of us and asking the question, what do we need to do different? We have no room to separate ourselves from our communities. We are right in the middle of the social unrest. We are right in the middle of the worst health outcomes in any part of the state. So how do we adjust, react, lean into this moment? Because of our scale, we have an opportunity to make a change, to really take responsibility for what's happening around us and make a change. And I'll just end with this. I mean, we train and educate the majority of first responders, whether they be police, nurses. That is a role that we play, and we have to take responsibility and accountability for what's happening and use this opportunity to make a change in our community. So that's where we're at today, and that's the struggle we're having, and that's the opportunity that we have.
Thank you. Ben.
We've had a very different type of experience from the educational aspect of Minerva has been completely not affected and unchanged. Despite the fact that we're a residential university, all of our classes have always been delivered via live video on our own built learning environment. And so when the pandemic struck, we didn't have to cancel classes or change the modality in any way. Everybody finished the semester. We started the semester on time. And so in that regard, if you look at it from a class perspective, there was no change whatsoever. But the operational impact to the university was dramatic. More than 90% of Minerva students study physically not in their country of origin. And so in order for our students to largely get to their residence hall, they have to go through visa, immigration, flights, all sorts of other things to upend and move their entire lives, which has become much, much more difficult this semester. And so traditionally we operate in 4 global cities at a time. This fall, we only operated in 3, San Francisco, London, and Berlin. We did not operate in Seoul, which has traditionally been a fall city for us. We'll be doing that in the spring. 30% of our students are actually taking their Minerva experience remotely and are studying from home. 70% are in residence. And our programming, our residential programming, is highly integrated with what we do for the actual course material and the formal education. And so we have a large set of integrated learning outcomes and experiential learning that we curate for students when they're in presence. And so despite the fact that we have 70% of our students in residence, we have to now shift all of the experiential learning, or most of the experiential learning, online, both because we have students that aren't physically there and because the students that are there can't congregate together in a room. And so we're doing experiential things online, we're doing things outside, and we also, because of the nature of the programming, the classes themselves have scrambled. Usually our 3rd-year students are all together and our 4th-year students are all together. Now we have a mix of all 4 classes in San Francisco and the 3 upper-level classes in London and Berlin. And so we had to do, we think, a lot of our on-the-ground programming pretty dramatically.
Wow. Peter.
Well, we have probably one of the more different situations of the people here. We first went online in 1989, so preceding AOL. So we've been doing it for a few years. We still have 30 campuses that operate around the country. We shut all those down on May 13th. We moved 5,000 students online in a live synchronous environment to mirror what they had been doing. The rest of our students were already online in an asynchronous environment, back and forth with their professors on the traditional Blackboard program that we've been using. We moved all of our site-based people, and we had 3,700 people supporting those students, to a home-based environment. And we did that over the weekend without pretty much missing a beat. I think for us, the most important consideration was the safety of our students and our faculty and our staff. We made the decision early on to stay remote. We made the decision just last week to remain remote for all of our staff through the end of May of next year. And for our students, we are committed through the end of this calendar year to remain remote. The things that have changed, I think, the most and the least, for us, I think the most significant change is the amount of stress that our students are dealing with. Many of our students, again, are moms with kids, and now they're dealing with being a teacher, a mom, working, and being a student, and doing all that out of a home environment that is obviously, very compressed in terms of the number of people in it and the amount of activity going on. When your child is trying to do a Zoom call with their school, you're trying to do a class for your online higher education program. It's very stressful. And so we have academic counselors that support all of our students, and they've been working overtime to make sure that our students are getting the relief they need so they can continue their studies. I think the one thing that has surprised me and has not changed at all, and that's what's surprising, is the persistence of our students. We have a measure we call the on-track metric, and that metric is students who stay on track to graduate on time. And for us, on time is the iPad's definition of 1.5 times the amount of time it could take to graduate. And our on-track persistence for those students has not changed one bit. Our students have an incredible amount of grit, and they continue to demonstrate that through this pandemic and the social unrest that David and Eloy talked about.
Wow, very interesting, and clearly different situations for different types of institutions. Well, let me ask a question. If each of you would forecast out for your institutions 5 years from now to 2025, how does your institution look different than it does today? And maybe that's part of it is what how the pandemic is changing us. But Eloy spoke to situations that were already there pre-pandemic. So what do you see as the change that you're expecting in 2025? And let's see, Eloy, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So, interestingly enough, we had been, prior to the pandemic, we had been in a long and sometimes contentious conversation about how do we leverage technology more? How do we help our faculty reach more students, be more effective, gather more data about our students? And of course, there was a lot going on about whether or not we could ever do that. Well, here we are. We're here now. And so I think we've advanced 5 years in a matter of 5 months in the use of technology. And that's something that we have to hold on to. Given the challenges, particularly for public institutions, that states face in funding public institutions going forward after this pandemic and with the economic crisis that we now face, it's going to be incredibly important that we, over the next 5 years, leverage the technology that we've been able to use during this pandemic, use that as a stepping stone to do more, and really think about how we reach more adult learners, because states like California have had such a huge unemployment and underemployment of our adult worker population, and many of those jobs are not coming back. So how do we work with partners like the University of Phoenix and Brandman University and others who are focused on adult learners, and how do we leverage this opportunity to move students along, to help more individuals get back into the economy, and to ensure that our state remains prosperous? So that's what I see different. It's the mission that we've always been about. The question now is, in the next 5 years, we will approach that mission very differently and be able to reach more students.
Thank you. And Carol, what about for Davidson? What might be changing in 5 years?
So in some sense, I think I can only answer that question by talking about how I think the general post-secondary educational landscape will change. And so I feel like finally folks in traditional education at places like Davidson, those of us who are at these traditional residential institutions, have finally kind of caught up to looking at the challenge that we face as a sector, which is how do we educate more people at a lower cost, more quickly, and with a clear sense of the value of what we're doing. So in 5 years, I think that we, all of us, will have a clearer sense of the role that we play in that broader project, and that institutions will, like Davidson and many others, will serve a broader range of learners in very different ways as we continue to differentiate the sector and strive to ensure equity for all learners. And by that, I mean learners are able to identify which path within this sector is best for them, given their aspirations, career and life aspirations. So I'm hopeful that we have a different sense of our place in that overall project, and that we have a different understanding of the sector in which we're operating.
Thank you, Carolyn. Peter, I just have to go to you next. And I want to hear your response to Carol's comment of everybody's getting time to catch up. And how is that for you? You've been serving adult learners for the longest time. Is this scary for you that everybody else is catching up, or are you even better prepared?
Well, look, I think competition is healthy in any industry, including higher education. And the more people that become good at delivering education to adults, the better and the more powerful we'll get in terms of being on our game. In terms of what we see the future as for our university, which I think somewhat mirrors what Carol was talking about for the general public. More than 85% of students come to a university in order to get a better job or get a better career. And so when you think about what the real responsibility of a university is to help those people progress in their career. And we know that as we move forward with the changes in technology and the changes in jobs, those careers are going to change over time. And the idea that you go to school once when you're young and you have a job for life and you have the skills you need for life, as Michael talked about earlier this morning, long gone. And so the idea that you need continuous education and continuous reskilling fits well into the idea of serving adult learners. So I feel like the rest of the traditional university field will, as you pointed out, move to the place where University of Phoenix feels that its responsibility lays, which is serving adult learners throughout the course of their career and going well beyond degrees. So you don't, after you've got your bachelor's degree, you might not need a master's degree. You might need a certificate or a badge or a competency or a skill. And so I see us and I see other universities in the future expanding their offerings to be better aligned to what industry is looking for, with shorter bursts of learning that allow people to get those promotions or get those new jobs that they need, especially now sort of in this current economic crisis where the idea of getting a new job and your old job having disappeared is pretty critical for people. So we are doubling down on the concept of career services and doubling down on the idea that we have to serve you pre-enrollment, helping you understand what career might be available for you, giving you the skills you need to get started in that career, continuing to work with you throughout your career in order to get you upskilled until you decide to retire.
Thank you, Peter. And David, I have to go to you next. Is Peter's definition of how he thinks about the purpose of education for students the same as yours in terms of career focused? How would you respond, and where is Morehouse headed in the next 5 years?
I think it starts with the role, at least for Morehouse, of not preparing our students to go into viable careers is necessary. And it is true that I think students and their parents search for the school choice with some eye toward what's the opportunity going to be once they've spent this 4 years and this much money. But for me, it starts with the fact that our role in higher education is to create the kind of citizens that our society needs. And if we only focus on career readiness, I think we lose the opportunity to shape the values and create a place where students can develop a vision for the kind of world that they want to create. In particular for our students who are in what I call our flagship program, which is very different than I think what Peter describes. You know, his average learner is clearly an adult learner who already has a career. Ours are 18 to 23-year-olds who are in the process of answering the fundamental questions of who am I, who can I be in the world, what does the world owe me? So our focus there has to be on creating citizens. That said, what I think the future holds for Morehouse that will look quite different, and this really plays on what I think Eloy had said and Peter, and that is where Morehouse has not been is focused on lifelong learning. And that is a place where now that we have had to move into the 21st century and embrace the power of technology right now to stay in business, but to expand our reach, because there's in my view, given what's going on in our society, so many areas where the distinctive values that Morehouse wraps around its education can be extended in other ways as students engage in lifelong learning. And I'll just give you one example. 2 years ago, the NFL, because of the Colin Kaepernick controversy, was looking for a school that they could partner with the Players Association, where their players and their executives could learn about nonviolent social advocacy to actually turn that controversy into real change. And the partner they chose was Morehouse. Well, I think there are lots of other sectors that are asking those same questions. And now, because we can leverage technology, we can take that to the world, along with our programs in business and bioinformation and all those kinds of things. So, and in fact, the last thing I'll say is we're cementing our new strategic plan with our board next week. And it just so happens that before COVID came, one of the themes that we had put forth to organize around was Morehouse Beyond Borders, which was about doing some of these things and accelerating the path and committing to it.
Wow, that's terrific. Thank you. Okay, Ben, tell us how Minerva is, what Minerva is going to be up to in the next 5 years, and what things are changing.
Well, there are some things that are just going to continue to change. We focus on, first and foremost, on how we teach our students to think systematically. We believe that there is no better career readiness than giving students broadly transferable skills. And the false dichotomy that we think exists largely is this concept of, well, you know, I need to certify, right? I need to have a certification that allows somebody to get a job, and I don't have time to provide them a broad education. And I just believe that that's fundamentally a flawed logic, because the reality is that when we all know this, none of our education, formal education, trained us for the context, situations, and challenges that we deal with every single day. None of our employees' education trained them to do any of those things, right? What trains people to be ready is the learning of wisdom, how to actually encounter a novel situation, a novel context, and draw upon lessons from other areas appropriately. But the enterprise of actually enabling a student to think systematically means that you not only have to rethink on a radical basis the curricular approach to university, but also it means that you have to constantly learn and improve and change it. So as an example, when we started Minerva, we started educating students 6 years ago, we had the concept and the idea of transferable knowledge. We set up the curricular structure to do it, but we didn't put the concept of measurement of dimensions of transfer at the core of our programming. Today, when we've launched in a high school curriculum that we're enabling now high schools to teach a very different curriculum, but with the same goal of systematic thinking, we are able to measure and track the application of knowledge, the transference of knowledge across 60 different dimensions on a per student basis across a 4-year arc, right? And so when we think about how do we improve the student experience from what happens in class, their experiential integrated learning, how they integrate what they learn into a workplace and into a work environment, it's all in the service of honing the educational outcomes of the students. So 5 years from now, I hope Minerva will be unrecognizable from the Minerva of today, simply because the educational advancement of what we offer will be so radically different.
It's great. Okay, well, I've got another question for you all, and now I want you to take out your crystal balls, and I want you to fast forward to 2030, and I want you to think about the whole higher ed sector, not just your institution, and think about 3 things. Give us your best thoughts on one thing that you really hope will change or be different by 2030. Again, this is for higher ed as a whole. One thing that will, for better or worse, probably be changing, and one thing that you hope will never change. And Peter, let's start with you.
Asking me to predict 10 years from now, I have trouble predicting what will happen next year. I think one of the things that I hope would change in higher education generally is a recognition of the need for the various types of institutions that all exist, and you've heard from people here today. Each of us has a very different philosophy, mission, vision, purpose, and ability to serve certain students. And we need all of them because people are at different points in their lives. So I hope that all those institutions would be judged on their outcomes, if you will, as opposed to essentially their tax status, which is one of the differentiations that we see today. So that would be kind of my hope for what might change. I think what will change, and this is something that we all need to address, is the compression of the tuition cost of education has to come down. I've recognized this when I started off in the university myself. My goal is to have all bachelor's degrees at a full degree program cost $25,000 total for the 4-year program, and less if you come in with credits. my goal is to have master's degrees cost $10,000. Because if you leverage technology, whether it's on the student side with artificial intelligence or on the back office side with robotic process automation, you can lower the cost of education to allow it to be affordable for more people, and we won't have to rely on the federal government subsidies as much as we do today. So I think that will change for better or for worse. I hope what doesn't change in higher education at all, and this is something that actually may have to change for some universities, is the focus on being student-centric. I've heard, unfortunately, higher ed faculty and higher ed chancellors say, you know, we're here to do our job. It really isn't my problem whether or not students learn or whether they succeed. And that's, I hope, a minority of people. But I hope that most of us still are focused on how do we help our students succeed in life? That is our guiding principle, and I hope it is for a long time to come for everybody.
David, what do you think?
You're on mute, David.
Yep. What I hope we see is what I think we have to address, and I echo a lot of what Peter said. I think we have to address the issues of affordability and accessibility to higher education and what it provides across these different formats even that we represent, with regard to thinking about it from the perspective of lifelong learning. I also expect that at least for small liberal arts colleges like mine, we will have reckoned with the fact that by ourselves, we cannot do everything that our students need, and therefore begin to develop partnerships with other institutions, including other higher ed institutions, rather than seeing them simply as, you know, the competition, but figuring out how to leverage our various distinctive competencies to create new ways to serve the society that we're going to enter into. Because the reality is, everybody entering the workforce today will have to be re-educated within the next 20 years, because the world we're moving into, half the jobs that exist today won't exist by 2050, and we don't know what the new ones will be. And so I think coming together to address that will aid us.
Thank you. Carol.
So just in addition to things that others have said, I would say that I hope we have a broader societal consensus that education is a public good, and that we all have an obligation to the education of the next generation, and that this isn't something to lay on the backs of our children, that it's a public good for which we all bear some responsibility. I think one thing that will change, you know, I have no idea how, is the relationship, is how the federal government and higher educational institutions interact with one another. I can't say whether that will be for good or for bad. It could go either way. And then one thing that I hope never changes is this inherited and often mocked idea that education is actually liberating, and that, to speak to the points that both Ben and David have made, that education is about more than a job. Education is about developing in people skills that are transferable precisely because they derive from the cultivation of deeply human capacities, which we all share, and that this a sense of the importance of cultivating those capacities and allowing the transferable skills that will serve our young people, no matter what happens in the realm of employment, that idea is important. We will lose the power of education as liberating and learning as liberating if we succumb to the idea that it's always about the next job.
Thank you. And Ben.
So I'll take it maybe in the reverse order. What I think is crucial for American higher education to sustain. I think American higher education is unique in that fact is the diversity of approaches, institutions, and types of education that are provided in this sector. We should not become a society of a monoculture of education, which in many countries is dictated by a government, right? And says, you know, this is the curriculum, this is what you will teach. In some regards, my fear of what I think will happen, unfortunately, is that despite the fact that we have a system that allows for such diversity of education, that we are actually self-homogenizing as a sector. If you look at most curricula at most universities, they're exactly the same. I mean, yes, you have upper level courses depending on what the professor's hobbies are and that's what they're going to teach the students, but the fundamental approaches, the sequences of courses, the approach, they're not only the same, they're also not curated in any different ways, right? You go to any university, you have big distribution requirements, you take this, you take that. There are core curricula are almost extinct from American higher education, and worse, because of that, the degradation of rigor which has been occurring for 50 years, I'm afraid will continue to accelerate. My hope is that 10 years from now, you're going to start to see a growing as opposed to a shrinking number of institutions that will stand against those trends, that will have very distinct educational philosophies with a well thought through curriculum, with extraordinarily high academic rigors and standards that'll eschew great inflation, that'll focus on actual learning outcomes, and that they'll begin to push that tide back.
Great, thank you. Eloy, you have the last word since we just have a moment left.
Well, in 2030, I think, you know, this movement that we've been experiencing over the last 10 to 15 years to democratize access to education is going to win out. I think it will begin to destroy what we think about as higher education today, what we value in higher education. You know, things like the degree will no longer hold sway. Competencies, opportunities, giving people opportunities will hold power. And so that's going to force us in higher education to rethink how we're organized, to rethink what we value. And so that's my hope, that we will be talking about how every person on the planet has access to what we have to offer today.
That's a wonderful way to leave it. Thank you all so much for being with us this afternoon and